Robert Duvall had been on more film sets than most actors could even dream of. Over a career that spanned more than 60 years, he watched Hollywood transform from the smoky studio of the 1950 seconds into the billionaire digital empire it is today. He had seen talent rise, crash, and rise again. He had watched legends crumble under the pressure of fame, and he had witnessed quiet nobodies become icons through nothing more than stubborn resilience. But if there was one thing Robert loved to talk about more than awards, box office numbers, or red carpets, it was the little, often overlooked realities that made movie sets feel human. The habits, the quirks, and the unexpected moments that proved stars were just people. Because behind all the glamour and perfection and press-ready smiles existed messy, unpredictable lives. Robert often said that the world believed Hollywood to be a perfume-scented palace filled with perfect people, but spend one day on set and you would discover something entirely different. Cameras didn't capture everything. Editing erased what audiences weren't meant to see. But working 12-hour days, wearing heavy costumes under scorching lights, filming intense scenes over and over again that exposed humanity in all its rawness, and sometimes that meant hygiene was, well, complicated. He would laugh about it, never in cruelty, but in the warm, amused tone of a man who had seen it all, and learned to find joy in the imperfect. In interviews he would often say, "You think stars shine? Try standing next to one after a 10-hour shoot in wool in the middle of summer. Nobody smells like royalty." Then, he believed, people needed to know that the myth of Hollywood perfection was just that, a myth. And sharing those stories felt like lifting a curtain, letting the audience feel closer to the legends they admired. It wasn't about shaming or mocking anyone. It was about reminding the world that success didn't erase flaws. It simply dressed them in expensive clothing. Robert remembered his early days when he was a young actor struggling to find work. He had no trailer, no assistant, no comfort. He showed up with the wrinkled script in one hand, and the fragile hope that someone would believe in him. Back then, hygiene on set wasn't just imperfect, it was brutal. Actors squeezed together in tiny dressing rooms, the smell of hairspray and sweat mixing with cigarette smoke, makeup caked onto tired faces, and no air conditioning. He used to joke that the real reason actors looked dramatic in old films was because they were trying not to faint from the heat. But as the years passed and his fame grew, Robert began to notice that even the biggest stars, the ones fans imagined living like gods, struggled with basic human challenges. Long shooting schedules left no time for proper showers. Heavy costumes trapped heat and sweat. Emotional scenes drained energy. Some actors laughed it off. Some were embarrassed. Some didn't care at all. Robert would never name names just to hurt people. He believed in loyalty, but he also believed that true stories, told with heart, helped the world understand the truth behind the myth. And today, as he sat in his quiet home, looking out at the sun-washed hills of Virginia, where he retreated from Hollywood chaos, he decided he wanted to share something more real. The funny, surprising, and unforgettable hygiene stories he had witnessed behind the scenes. Not to shame anyone, but to reveal the humanity in the icons people worshipped. He leaned forward, hands folded gently, voice warm with nostalgia as he began to speak, remembering film sets that smelled like sweat, cologne, old leather, and history. "Let me tell you," he laughed softly, "sometimes the cleanest looking stars could knock you out at 10 feet. You never knew what you were walking into on set." The first story he recalled came from the early days of his career, long before The Godfather or Apocalypse Now, when he was still learning the rhythm of film sets and discovering how unpredictable they could be. It was a small Western picture, shot in the desert under a sun that punished everyone equally. The wardrobe department dressed actors in heavy animal skin coats and layered wool clothing designed to look historically accurate. The heat was relentless. The dust stuck to sweaty skin, turning faces gritty and raw. There was barely any shade, and the water tasted metallic from tin containers. Showers were nearly impossible. The nearest plumbing was 6 miles away at a rundown motel with broken pipes. One of the lead actors, a man audiences adored for his heroic roles and perfect smile, struggled more than anyone. He was the picture of confidence on screen, but off screen he was shy and quiet, uncomfortable with confrontation. As the days passed, the combination of heat, sweat, and stress began to take a toll, and the smell of his costume became almost unbearable. The problem wasn't laziness or carelessness, it was simply that his costume couldn't be washed, and there was no time for bathing between shoots. Every time he walked by, cast members exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to handle the situation. The makeup crew whispered desperately about needing someone to say something, but nobody wanted to embarrass him. Robert remembered the moment the director finally paused filming. The scene required Robert and the actor to sit shoulder to shoulder, on horseback for hours as they waited for the perfect lighting. The sun beat down like a hammer. The leather saddle burned through their jeans, and the smell, intense, sour, suffocating, made it impossible to breathe. Robert tried not to react, but his eyes watered. He leaned slightly away, pretending to adjust his reins. The director sighed heavily, lifted his hat, wiped his forehead, and muttered, "For the love of God, somebody hose these boys down." Everyone burst into laughter, including the actor himself. And that moment broke the shame. The wardrobe team brought buckets of water, splashing them over costumes like a battlefield cleanup. The actor grinned sheepishly and said, "I warn you now, I smell like I slept inside a dead horse." From that day on, the cast bonded through humor. They joked about being the stinkiest cowboys in movie history, turning misery into camaraderie. That experience taught Robert something he never forgot. Sometimes the most glamorous stars carried burdens fans would never imagine. And Hygiene wasn't about personal failure. It was about the brutal reality of filmmaking. Hard work wasn't always pretty, and perfection was a lie. Years later, on a massive war film, Robert encountered another unforgettable situation. The movie required long battle scenes filmed in mud, rain, and smoke. Actors spent hours lying on the ground soaked in artificial blood and dirt. The costumes were wet, heavy, and unwashed for continuity. The smell of damp fabric mixed with burnt gunpowder clung to everyone. Some actors complained endlessly, but one, a world-famous leading man known for his charm and elegance, embraced the chaos with enthusiasm. He believed realism demanded commitment. He refused to shower for days at a time, claiming he needed to smell like war. The cast respected his devotion, but the side effect was unavoidable. His presence became overwhelming. Every time he walked into the tent where actors gathered between takes, the air thickened with the brutal scent of sweat and wet wool. Robert remembered sitting across from him as they prepared for an emotional scene. The smell was so strong Robert felt dizzy. He looked up and saw the other actor smiling with genuine pride. Convinced he had achieved artistic authenticity, Robert admired his dedication, but he couldn't stop himself from chuckling. "You don't just smell like war," he whispered. "You smell like the end of the world." They both laughed, so hard that the makeup artist begged them not to ruin their bloody prosthetics. It became an ongoing joke during filming that anyone brave enough to sit next to him for more than 5 minutes deserved an award. Nobody told him to stop. Nobody complained in cruelty. Instead, they supported him because they believed in the art they were creating. Those were the moments Robert loved most. When discomfort built friendship, when struggle became humor, when stars became human. And yet, there were situations where hygiene wasn't about costumes or filmmaking. Conditions, sometimes it came from personal habits that clashed in close environments. On another film, Robert worked with an actor who openly admitted he hated deodorant and believed natural body scent was healthier. He was proud of it, almost philosophical, quoting ancient warriors and tribes. Robert respected individuality, but after long days under hot lights, the natural scent became powerful enough to clear a room. The crew joked quietly about needing gas masks. One day, during a rehearsal, Robert was supposed to deliver a dramatic monologue right beside him. As the scene began, the smell hit so hard that Robert momentarily forgot his lines. The director yelled, "Cut!" convinced something emotional had thrown him off. Robert didn't know how to explain without hurting feelings, so he simply asked for 5 minutes. He stepped outside, laughing as he gasped for fresh air. Later that evening, rather than complain behind his back, Robert approached the actor kindly. He wasn't angry, just honest, as he always was. He said gently, "My friend, I love working with you, but the lights make things tough. Can we find a compromise?" The actor appreciated the respect. He switched to a mild natural deodorant, and everyone worked harmoniously again. That experience became a quiet lesson in communication. Kindness solved what gossip would have destroyed. As Robert continued telling his stories, his eyes softened with the warmth of memory. He spoke not just as an actor, but as a witness to generations of humanity disguised as stardom. Every story held laughter, struggle, and connection. He believed that talking about these real moments didn't diminish legends. It honored them. It acknowledged that greatness didn't require perfection. He paused, smiling, and said quietly, "People think Hollywood is built on beauty, but the truth is, it's built on sweat, a lot of sweat. And sometimes, it shows." Robert Duvall took a breath and leaned back in his chair, letting silence settle in for a moment before continuing. There was something almost sacred about remembering the people. He had worked with the legends, the rising stars, the dreamers who fought through exhaustion and physical discomfort to bring stories to life. The world saw Hollywood as sparkling diamonds and polished perfection. But Robert knew the truth. Behind every glamorous red carpet lay countless unglamorous battles. And sometimes, those battles smelled like sweat, damp costumes, and the kind of exhaustion that seeped into your bones. But those moments, raw, human, and messy, were the ones he cherished the most. He began the next chapter of his memories with a soft laugh, the sound of a man who had lived through enough chaos to appreciate humor even in discomfort. He remembered a film set decades ago that required long days outdoors in a swampy, humid southern landscape. The summer air clung to skin like glue, mosquitoes swarmed constantly, and the thick mud sucked the shoes off anyone who dared to stand still too long. The wardrobe department kept towels and fans nearby, but nothing could truly cut through the damp heat. Everyone's clothes were soaked within minutes of arriving on location. Makeup melted, hair plastered flat, and the smell of wet fabric and sweat hung in the air like fog. Among the cast was an actress who was admired around the world for her beauty and elegance. Someone audiences imagined smelling like perfume and silk. But nature didn't care about fame. The heat hit her harder than most, and her costume, layers of long skirts and old-fashioned corsetry, trapped moisture until the fabric became heavy and sour. She did everything she could to stay fresh: perfume sprays, powders, lavender, essential oils, constant trips to the makeup tent. But the humidity defeated all of it. By midday, her clothing clung tightly to her skin, and she felt humiliated. Robert remembered the moment she pulled him aside, eyes anxious and voice trembling. "I feel awful," she whispered. "I must smell terrible. Everyone must hate standing near me." His heart ached for her vulnerability. This was a woman who had walked red carpets with flawless grace, who had graced magazine covers and inspired fashion trends. Yet here she was, embarrassed like any teenager on their first date, terrified of judgment. Robert smiled gently and said, "We're all suffering. You're not alone in this. We smell like we've been trapped in a sauna for a week. Every last one of us." She stared at him for a moment, then burst into laughter, wiping tears from her eyes. That laughter rippled across the set, breaking tension and turning misery into unity. From that day forward, the cast started a running joke. They greeted each other, not with "good morning," but with exaggerated sniffs and dramatic reactions. Like actors in a comedy sketch, the actress regained her joy, no longer trapped in silent shame. Robert believed moments like that proved the truth. Even the most admired stars were fragile inside, afraid of being imperfect. He often said that the strongest people were not the ones who hid weakness, but the ones who allowed themselves to laugh about it. Another unforgettable experience occurred years later, during a massive production involving horses, battle reenactments, and endless outdoor riding scenes. The film required long hours in leather saddles under brutal heat. Horses sweated thickly beneath their tack, and the actors, wearing layers of costume, soaked through their shirts and jackets. Dust from galloping horses coated faces and settled into every crease of clothing. After a few hours, no one looked or smelled remotely civilized. But there was one actor in particular, a loved Hollywood veteran with a booming laugh and a generous heart, who struggled more than the rest. He was physically large, broad-shouldered, strong as an ox, but the heat drained him instantly. Sweat drenched him before the first take. His costume absorbed the moisture like a sponge, and by midday, the smell became overwhelming. He knew it. He joked about it constantly, slapping his chest and announcing, "Clear the way, here comes the human smoke bomb." The crew groaned playfully and fanned the air around him. Robert remembered one afternoon when the heat peaked at nearly 105 degrees. They were filming a close-up emotional scene, and the director insisted on multiple takes. Robert stood only inches away from the actor, and the smell was staggering. His eyes watered, his throat burned, and he felt lightheaded. He tried to control his breathing, but the director demanded intensity, closeness, and focus. By the fifth take, Robert was fighting dizziness. The director yelled, "One more time, I need more pain in the eyes." Robert wanted to laugh. Pain? Oh, there was pain. Finally, when the take finished, Robert collapsed into a chair, gasping dramatically for air. The actor looked down at him, concerned, until Robert lifted a hand and whispered hoarsely, "My friend, your commitment may just kill me." They burst into uncontrollable laughter. The actor later arranged for a wardrobe assistant to bring fresh shirts to set every few hours. He never complained once. To Robert, that was the perfect example of humility, knowing your weaknesses and meeting them with humor instead of pride. But not every situation resolved so easily. There were moments when personal habits clashed with professional needs. On a different film, Robert worked with a younger rising star who had a completely different approach to hygiene. The actor was extremely disciplined, strict diet, strict exercise, strict skincare, but he believed soap was harmful to the body and refused to use it. Instead, he washed only with water, convinced it was more natural. Robert respected individuality and always avoided judging people for personal beliefs, but weeks of intense shooting created a problem. The natural odor became so strong that cast members struggled to work closely with him. Crew members quietly opened windows, sprayed neutralizing mist, and tried to shift air circulation patterns. Robert could see tension building. People whispered, complaining behind closed doors, but no one wanted to hurt the actor's feelings. That silence created pressure, and pressure created division. Robert hated that. He had always believed in honesty, spoken with dignity. So one afternoon, he approached the actor privately. He chose his words gently, and his voice was low and calm. "Listen," Robert said, "you're a great talent. You're dedicated and hardworking, but we're all suffering from the heat, and it's affecting the scenes. I'm not asking you to change who you are, just to help us work together more comfortably." The young actor looked stunned at first, embarrassed, even wounded. But then something changed in his eyes. He nodded slowly and said, "Thank you for saying it kindly." Nobody else had the courage. The next day, he compromised using mild natural soap and deodorant. The atmosphere lifted instantly, and the cast worked together smoothly again. Robert always treasured that memory, proof that maturity wasn't about never making mistakes, it was about listening. He paused the story there, taking a deep breath. His voice softened as he shifted from humor to reflection. He said he believed there was something deeply meaningful in these uncomfortable experiences. Hygiene wasn't just about smell, it was about respect, vulnerability, communication, and shared struggle. Too many people imagine actors existing above ordinary problems, immune to sweat and dirt and fatigue. But if audiences spent even one day on a movie set, they would understand. Fame didn't make anyone superhuman. Actors were makeup, but underneath, they were just tired people trying their best to create beauty from chaos. Robert went on to share another emotional memory, one that wasn't funny at all, but painfully honest. During a film shot in extremely cold weather, many cast members wore thick wool and fur costumes for hours in freezing temperatures. The material grew damp with breath and melted snow, then refroze, trapping odor deep inside. The smell became sharp and sour, mixed with the metallic scent of frost. One actor, known for his dramatic talent and powerful performances, fell ill from the cold, but refused to leave the set. His body odor grew stronger as fever spread through him, and he was too weak and ashamed to notice. Robert recalled sitting beside him by a small heater between takes. The actor shivered violently, teeth chattering, face pale. Robert wrapped an extra blanket around him and gently pressed a warm cup of soup into his hands. "You don't have to be a hero," Robert whispered quietly. "Nobody will think less of you for resting." The actor stared at him with tired eyes and said, "I'm afraid people will think I'm weak." Robert placed a hand over his and said softly, "Weakness is not failing. Weakness is part of being human. And being human is why we connect to stories." The actor broke down crying. Robert held him until the tears stopped. The next morning, he finally allowed himself to rest, and production paused so he could recover. When he returned, the crew cheered for him, not because he pretended to be perfect, but because he allowed himself to be real. Robert watched so many careers rise and fall, but the ones he respected most were the people who admitted their flaws. He believed that audiences could love actors more deeply once they understood that stars were not made of marble, but of flesh and sweat and mistakes. He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "People think strength is about hiding imperfection," he said. "But real strength comes when you stop pretending to be untouchable." He remembered one more extraordinary story from a set where the cast filmed long night scenes with heavy fog machines. The mix of artificial fog and sweat created a sticky coating over everyone's skin. No matter how clean you started the day, by midnight you felt like you had rolled in sugar, syrup, and wood smoke. People washed their faces and hands constantly, but nothing helped. The air smelled like burnt oil and damp wool. Makeup artists scrubbed endlessly, but the residue clung like glue. Everyone was miserable. One young actress, new to Hollywood, full of hope and fear, began apologizing constantly, convinced she smelled horrible and that she was ruining everything. Her insecurity became crushing. She isolated herself, convinced. The cast whispered about her. Robert noticed the sadness in her eyes. One morning, as she sat alone during breakfast break, shoulders hunched, stirring her coffee with trembling hands, he sat beside her without saying anything at first. After a few moments, she whispered, "I don't belong here. I'm not like everyone else. I can't handle this. I must be disgusting." Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Robert shook his head gently. "Every person here feels the same. Nobody is fresh and perfect right now. We all stink. We all look terrible. And we are all doing our best." She looked up at him, tears forming. "Then why do they all look so confident?" Robert smiled warmly. "Because most people are pretending. That's all courage is sometimes. Pretending long enough until you really believe it." She hugged him tightly, whispering thank you again and again. From that day on, she walked onto set with a new steadiness, no longer crushed by shame. Years later, she became a superstar. She once spoke about Robert in an interview, saying, "He taught me that being imperfect wasn't a flaw, it was a bridge between hearts." Robert would never forget that. It proved his belief that uncomfortable human moments weren't something to hide. They were something to connect through. Because when people let walls fall, they found something more precious than perfection: empathy. He leaned back again and sighed softly. The memories flowed like an old film reel spinning in his mind. Dusty, imperfect, yet filled with light. "Hollywood is built on illusion," he said quietly. "But the real magic isn't the illusion, it's the people underneath. Messy, sweaty, exhausted, trying to build something meaningful together." He looked straight ahead, voice steady, full of reverence for every person who had ever stood under hot lights or freezing rain for the sake of art. "We were not gods on those sets," he said slowly. "We were just human beings, and that was enough." Robert Duvall sat quietly for a moment before beginning the final stretch of his memories. His voice softened, deep with reflection, as though he were traveling through time. He said that, the older he got, the more clearly he understood that life is not measured in awards, applause, or headlines. It is measured in moments. In the quiet battles people fight when no camera is rolling. The moments of struggle, doubt, imperfection, and courage. The world celebrated stars for their beauty and success, but rarely for their humanity. Yet humanity, he believed, was where the real stories lived. He remembered a film set from many years earlier, one that changed him forever. The movie required grueling physical scenes, filmed in harsh weather. The cast worked long days without breaks, covered in mud, sweat, and rain. People shivered uncontrollably between takes, and their costumes never fully dried. The smell of wet wool, damp boots, and exhausted bodies clung to the air like fog. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't beautiful. It was raw survival. Among the cast was a respected actor in his late 60s, a man admired around the world, but quietly battling health issues. The long hours and physical strain wore him down quickly. His body odor became strong because he could not shower between scenes. The freezing temperature made changing clothes dangerous. Some crew members grumbled quietly. Others whispered behind his back. Robert heard those whispers like nails scraping glass, and anger sparked inside him. How quickly people forgot compassion. During a break one evening, the actor sat alone, trembling from cold, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had already gone lukewarm. Robert walked over and wrapped his own coat around the man's shoulders. The older actor looked at him with wet eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry. I know, I'm a burden." Robert's voice grew tight as he recalled the moment. He placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder and said, "You are not a burden. The world owes you more respect than it knows how to give. You have carried film history on your back. Now let us carry you for a while." The man's chin quivered as tears streamed down his face. He whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Robert would never forget the weight of those words. Most of life's suffering, he realized, comes not from difficulty, but from the fear of being invisible. He sighed deeply as he remembered watching the man struggle day after day, refusing to quit, determined to finish every scene. His clothes smelled of rain-drenched wool, his gloves of damp leather, his breath of illness, but when the camera rolled, he was magnificent. He delivered performances so powerful that even the toughest crew members stood frozen in awe. Sometimes, the smell of hardship is simply the smell of a warrior who refuses to fall. Robert believed that audiences never truly understood how much blood and sweat poured into the films they loved. They saw edited perfection, the suffering, the broken bones, the frozen nights, the clothes that smelled of rain and struggle. If only they knew, he said softly, they would love these people even more. He continued with another story, one filled with laughter and heartwarming chaos. On one production, the cast stayed in a remote location where water shortages were constant. The crew rationed water strictly, enough for drinking, barely enough for cooking, and none for long showers. For weeks, everyone smelled like smoke, dirt, and stale clothing, hair clumped with dust and sweat, shirts stiffened with grime. It was like living at summer camp without the fun. Among the cast was a young comedian, adored for his quick wit. He turned misery into joy every single day. When everyone felt embarrassed about their odor, he created a ritual called the Aromatic Olympics. Every evening, actors stood in line jokingly, and the crew voted who smelled the worst, awarding the winner a crown made from paper towels. People laughed until they cried. For the first time, everyone felt united. No shame, no judgment, just laughter. One night, the comedian won the crown and wore it proudly on set the next morning. When filming began, he delivered his lines with ridiculous, dramatic flair, flipping the crown and striking royal poses. The director tried to stay serious, but failed, collapsing into laughter. That scene ended up being one of the most memorable moments in the film. Born from discomfort and ridiculous joy, Robert smiled as he retold it. "We thought we were dying from smell," he laughed, "but we were actually learning to survive through humor." Then his voice softened again. "Hard times reveal character," he said quietly. "Some people complain and crumble. Others rise and turn darkness into light." He paused, remembering one actress whose strength he admired deeply. She had gone through heartbreaking personal loss shortly before filming began. She carried sorrow in her eyes, a sadness that weighed like wet clothing. On set, she worked through grueling costume hours, standing in heavy gowns that soaked up sweat and became unbearably hot under the lights. She avoided hugging people, embarrassed that her clothes smelled musty and stale from the constant wearing. But she kept showing up, delivering breathtaking performances that moved everyone to silence. One night, after a long day, Robert found her crying quietly in a corner of the soundstage. She wiped her face quickly when she saw him, embarrassed. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "I feel disgusting all the time. I feel broken." Robert sat beside her and said gently, "Nobody is judging you. We are all human, and you are carrying more weight than any of us can see." She cried harder, her shoulders trembling. Robert put a comforting arm around her. "People think film sets are glamorous," he continued softly, "but the truth is, they're full of people trying to survive something real. You're not alone." She leaned against him silently, drawing strength not from perfection, but from shared humanity. The next day, she returned to work with fire in her eyes. And when the film premiered, audiences praised her performance as one of the best of her career. They saw brilliance, but never knew how much pain and sweat it was made from. Robert wiped his eyes as he remembered her. "Sometimes people shine brightest when they're standing in the darkest places," he whispered. He shifted to a deeper reflection. Not about actors, but about time. He said the older he became, the more he understood the fragility of life. He had seen legends age, seen unbreakable bodies weaken, seen perfect faces wrinkle, seen icons forgotten by the world that once worshipped them. Fame was a flickering candle, and time was the wind. No one could escape change. He remembered a moment when he looked around a set and realized that many of the faces he had grown up working with were gone, taken by age, illness, or simply fading into history. He thought about the countless people audiences never knew. Costume artists who spent hours hand-washing sweaty garments in freezing water. Makeup artists who stayed late cleaning skin raw from hot lights. Crew members who carried equipment until their arms shook. Extras who stood in the sun for 12 hours in heavy wool coats. Those people, Robert said, voice thick with emotion, were the real stars. They bore the weight of the movies. They smelled like hard work because they lived inside it. He reflected on an old saying from a stage mentor he respected deeply. "If you smell like sweat, it means you showed up." The words echoed inside him forever. Robert admitted something he had never shared publicly, that as he aged, he began to fear losing dignity, becoming a burden, becoming someone others whispered about behind closed doors. But then he realized the truth. Dignity doesn't come from perfection. It comes from being real, from showing scars instead of hiding them, from laughing at discomfort, from loving others through their messy moments. He leaned forward, determination lighting his eyes. "If you're watching this," he said warmly, "remember that imperfection is not failure. Aging is not losing. Sweat and struggle are not embarrassing. They are proof that you lived." He looked straight ahead, voice steady but tender. "We are all temporary, but kindness that lasts." He paused, then offered his final closing story, a story that summed up everything he believed. Near the end of a long project, after weeks of heat and exhaustion and the shared smell of labor, the cast and crew gathered for a final celebration. No one looked glamorous. Their clothes smelled of hard work, their faces weathered, their bodies tired. But when they raised glasses together, they felt a deep sense of pride. They had survived something difficult, side by side. Imperfection had united them. One crew member lifted his drink and said, "To sweat, to struggle, and to stories worth telling." Everyone cheered, voices strong, and Robert felt tears in his eyes. He realized then that the memories that stayed with him the longest were not the red carpets or the polished interviews, but the messy, smelly, difficult days where humanity shone brightest. "Life," he said gently, "not about smelling perfect. It's about standing together when life smells bad." He looked up with a tired, grateful smile. "Hollywood taught me many things," he whispered, "but the most important lesson is this: We are all human. We all sweat. We all struggle. And none of us should ever walk through discomfort alone. He rested his hands together and spoke his final message, one filled with wisdom, meant for every viewer, especially older audiences who had lived through their own private battles. Be gentle with yourself, he said softly, and be gentle with others. Nobody is perfect. We are all just trying to make it through the scene. He looked out into the distance with eyes full of memory, full of life, full of gratitude. And if I could go back and relive it all, the sweat, the struggle, the smell, I would. Because that is where I found family. That is where I found truth. That is where I found myself. He smiled one last time, a smile both heavy and beautiful. Thank you for listening to my stories. The room fell silent. Not empty silence, but the kind filled with warmth, reflection, and respect. And in that silence, every viewer understood what he meant. Perfection is an illusion. Humanity is real. And humanity, even when messy, is beautiful.